We finally have a brand new Lilo and Stitch movie in theaters this week, and while it is a live-action remake to the original film, I think it's pretty cool that now a new generation is about to discover who Stitch is. And for me, Stitch was the character I just grew up when it came down to the Disney animated side. Now, you guys know that I love Toy Story and Pixar and all that stuff, but when it came down to the Disney animated side, I was obsessed with Stitch and the countless sequels that he had, and specifically the Lilo and Stitch, the series. But we're not going to be talking about the series today, and I actually think later down this year, I actually might do a whole retrospect on every single one of the Lilo and Stitch movies. But in today's video, we're going to be diving in and ranking every Lilo and Stitch movie from worst to best. Now, this is 5 movies to talk about. 4 of those are animated, 1 is the live action film. This is definitely going to be a fun video. Definitely leave your thoughts down below, and without further ado, let's get into this. Honestly, kind of as like a preface to this, I enjoy all these movies to love them. So there's a little bit of biasness into this, but at my number 5, we have Stitch the movie. Now, of course, this is just a pilot straight to video Stitch movie that takes place after the original one, takes place in the chronological order after Lilo and Stitch 2, where Stitch discovers that he has cousins. And this is a setup film for the series. And for the execution of what it is, it's fun for that. Like, I don't have any issues with that. It leads into the series perfectly, which I also just got done rewatching, and the series is awesome. It's so much fun. Concept of alien of the week, which cousin are we going after this week? And it's enjoyable for that nature. And Stitch the movie kind of has that. You get more creatures and more characters in this world. And I think as a little bit of a sequel, it's fun for that. Now, is it the most life-changing thing? No. Does it tug at the heartstrings like the original Lilo and Stitch? No, not really. Like there's cute moments where you're like, oh, that's sweet, but nothing that actually brings any tears to your eyes. This is about Stitch wanting to add to his Ohana a little bit more and discover where he's at. And when it comes to the discovery of all of his other cousins, I think it's a cool idea. Now, for me, I think the cousins are the biggest and cool aspect to what keeps this film afloat. I think specifically, I love the designs of everyone else. Ruben, who is 625 in here, the design of him, and specifically, I also like that he is basically Stitch, but he's just lazy. At the same time, we have Sparky, who I think is just absolutely adorable and awesome. And for me, this is a fun movie that I just... I don't go back and rewatch it all too often, but it was one when I was a kid. I was super into it, and I love the series, so I appreciate this one a little bit more than what most people would. Then we get into my number 4, which is Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch. Now, this is a straight-to-video film as well. It went to home video. It never went into theaters. And I remember initially when I first saw this as a kid, I was a little bit let down by this movie. I was disappointed. But over the years, when I've gone back to rewatch it, I find myself actually liking it more and more, to the point where when I started this ranking, the way that I do rankings is I put everything in order, and then when I go back and rewatch the movies, I start adjusting. And Stitch Has a Glitch was in last place initially until I had done this last rewatch. And I think there's a lot of memorable and fun moments to it. In the comedy route, especially because of Pleakley and his whole sideline with David. I think that's just great. Jumba is a lot of fun here, and specifically the emotion of how he feels that he's on a timetable to save Stitch's life. I really like that, and it adds some tension to all the moments. But it's also like Lilo and Stitch, and Lilo trying to figure out what's going on with him without understanding the whole glitch aspect. And then it's Stitch trying to figure out, why is he being bad again? And I love the whole montage of him trying to do good things. And I also like the montage of them going through all the Elvis places to figure out his purpose. But alongside this, at the end of the day, this film tugs at those emotional strings that the first film sets up so perfectly that by the end, when you actually think for a second Stitch died, it honestly brings pain to your heart. And while we know they're not going to kill off Stitch, it was genuinely something that actually tugged at the heartstrings, brought me in, and got me emotional. And I think overall, Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch, is messy, it's chaotic, but it's fun and emotional at the same time, and it brings that same heart that Lilo and Stitch had. I wish they would have just doubled down on some of these sequels and some of these ideas a little bit more with Lilo and Nani, because as I've always mentioned, The heart of the story is always Stitch and Lilo's relationship. But I do genuinely think the soul of the original film comes down to Lilo and Nani's ohana and how Stitch fits into there. And I really wish Nani would have had a little bit of a better part in some of these other later sequels. But Stitch and Glitch is a fun movie. It's way better than it has any right to be, and I enjoy it. Then we get into my number 3, and that is Leroy and Stitch. Now, this is the conclusion to the Lilo and Stitch the series. Now, it's kind of interesting because if you just watch Stitch the movie and then never watch the show and then just dive into Leroy and Stitch, you're caught up. Like, you know the concept of what's going to happen. What needs to happen? Lilo and Stitch need to find all of his cousins. Well, Leroy and Stitch is the ending to that. They say, oh, you found them all. So you just basically skip the series. And I think that's interesting for, like, if for some reason this Lilo and Stitch series ever becomes lost media. I hope it never does. They should put that on Blu-ray so I can buy it. For any reason it does, I do find that interesting that you can literally just jump straight to that. But Leroy and Stitch, for me, is a film that I actually have only seen, like, twice. And this was the third time I've ever watched it in my life. And originally, when I had first seen that, when it came out at home on Disney Channel, that was my cinematic event. That was, holy shit, this is the conclusion to the Lilo and Stitch series for me. And I remember at that time I really liked it, and now I still really like it. I think, again, and this kind of goes to the same avenue, it doesn't tug at the heartstrings. It doesn't really bring the nature and the soul and the essence of what Lilo and Stitch is, personally, for me. Leroy and Stitch at least really showcases quite a few things, and themes that are a little bit bigger than I think should be in a finale to a kids' TV show. And one of those themes is, where are you actually supposed to belong? As characters, finish this job, you have Jumba, Pleakley, and Stitch who get these opportunities to go do a ton of awesome things that maybe they've always wanted to return to, always get off Earth. Stitch gets to lead, like, basically the army in space. Jumba gets to return to being a scientist, and Pleakley gets to go be a teacher and teach about Earth. But as they go into these roles, they notice that is not where their passion fully lies again. That maybe it's somewhere else, and they feel a little bit empty inside. And I really like, because that theme of emptiness and feeling like something is missing has been prevalent since the original film, in Stitch and what he discovers in himself. And Lilo fits the piece for that. And alongside this, throughout the entire Stitch the series, the biggest thing that you'll notice in that series is that Lilo is trying to find the missing piece for all of these cousins and where they belong. And Leroy and Stitch, for me, nails that aspect and theme on our main characters that we have followed since the first film. Characters that have grown together, that have lived together, that have been together. And I think that is the biggest and detailed thing. And it's not even just them. Gantu gets a little bit of that. Reuben gets a little bit of that, who finally gets his name in this movie. And even Lilo. They all come to an acceptance of what is the most important thing in life. And it's not your job, it's not your career, it's none of that shit. In the end of the day, it is your ohana. And Leroy and Stitch, I think, has some of the strongest messaging for it. And I think a lot of that messaging works if you did watch the entire series. If you never watched the series and you just jump to it, this may not work for you. This might be like the bottom tier of all films, Lilo and Stitch, for you. But for me, Leroy and Stitch hits that. But it also hits a nostalgic level of seeing all the cousins working together. Seeing cousins that you'd only seen in one episode prior, but getting to see them use their abilities again to save Stitch, to save Lilo, to save everybody on board. And I really like in a way, like, this was the pre-Endgame, seeing the Stitch's cousins taking on an army of Leroys. It's fabulous. It's awesome and great. And I love how they actually end up deciding to defeat Leroy in the end of the day. It's through music. It's through love. It's through passion. And I like that Jumba had written that into his DNA. Leroy and Stitch is a really fun movie that concludes the series, and I think this aspect and this avenue of Stitch very well. I always wish they would have doubled down and continued to make more things from Lilo and Stitch, but that's why we have a live-action remake now, is so that a new generation can be in the retold. And I know people will say, but Zach, they can just go back and watch the original stuff. Yes, but that's not how life works sometimes. Which brings me into my number 2, and that's the brand new Lilo and Stitch live action remake, which was one of the films that when it was announced, I was the most worried about. But then my worries went a little bit away once I saw that the director of Marcel the Shell with Shoes On was going to be directing this, Dean Fleischer Camp, and I knew this film was in good hands. And I think for the most part, he made an almost perfect retelling of Lilo and Stitch. I have grievances, which we'll talk about in a second, because now that the film is out, I will talk about spoilers. But Lilo and Stitch for me is one of the best, most beloved stories, and I think he lovingly reintroduces and retells this story into a fantastic light. And I think for me, the direction that he took with this seems a little bit chaotic, like I mentioned earlier about one of the other sequels. A little bit zany, a little bit weird, a little bit broken, a little bit messy, a little bit all over the place. But that's kind of like what Lilo and Stitch has always been. It's been very random. But as I mentioned prior, if Stitch is the heart of this franchise and the heart of that first movie, the soul is Lilo and Nani's Ohana and their relationship. And this film nails that to the highest degree. They nail Stitch. They didn't screw Stitch up. Stitch looks amazing visual effects wise. He looks great. I love all the antiques and the jokes they do with him. Like, I have no issues with Stitch. But the thing that I think really makes this film work is the little girl Maya, who plays Lilo, and Sydney, who plays Nani. Well, while Lilo, I could write a whole essay about how they got the perfect casting for that little girl. Like, she's perfect. And again, her relationship with Nani's great. Her relationship with Stitch is great. I love, in general, how they bring that life together, and how she interacts with Stitch is just amazing. But that relationship between Lilo and Nani, it feels even more important in this film than possibly from even the original. And I think Dean doubles down on that and showcases some harder emotion here. And a lot of that might be because this is a live action film, not an animated film, where the animated film does really strike it pretty hard. But seeing actual humans, not animated, emote and discuss certain prospects of their life, and specifically dealing with child protective services, is honestly heartbreaking. And the fact that Dean, that was one of the big changes where he really focuses in a little bit more on that. And I like how, in the end of the day, this is a drama about two sisters that just happen to have a little blue alien join the family, and the antiques that can really add up to that. But it's that drama that actually really adds to a lot of the tension, and some of the Stitch stuff is on the side. Not to the point where it would disappoint you, but you can get so emotionally invested with their characters, and I really love that. But going back to Stitch, I just loved everything they did with him. It was so fun to watch it with my wife, who's also a giant Lilo and Stitch fan, and laugh and smile and honestly just get really on board with everything that they did with the character. And in the end of the day, they build that relationship between Stitch and Lilo, and you see Stitch slowly start to change. And I think in a way, it's not as like twisting. Like, it's just like you see the relationship and the way that it builds and what strikes Stitch at the most important moment. And there's a couple changes in there, but none of them ever bothered me. There's only one change that bothered me, and it wasn't the fact that Pleakley and Jumba couldn't be aliens throughout with dressed in human clothes, because they show that in the movie and it's ridiculous. And it's not Pleakley either. I think Billy Magnuson did an amazing job as Pleakley. My issue is Jumba. Now, I've been not a big fan of Zach Galifianakis since day one when they announced him for Jumba. Nothing wrong with him. I think he's a funny actor. I think he's a good actor. But he's not Jumba. Jumba needs a little bit of a deeper voice. But you take that aside, you put it aside. The design of him looks great, which really fast. All the aliens look great, one for one. Everyone's amazing. Love, love, love the design of everything, especially that opening scene. Like, wow, they did a great job bringing that back to life. But I did not like, in the end of the day, what they did with Jumba. I can understand to a certain level and degree why they did that with him. Gantu's not really in the original movie. He's only in it for like 5 minutes, so I also understand why they didn't just bring him back in here. And probably for budget restraints is also the reason that they decided not to. It's a kind of a retread, so let Jumba. But I would have rather had a smaller scale finale than the big one that they went with. And this is where I'm about to talk about spoilers for a second. So, if you haven't seen the remake yet, you are warned. I'm going to spoil some stuff. If you've seen the original film, I mean, you can basically like allude to what's going to happen. But I am going to mention one detail that I really liked. Now,
Before I get into what I would have personally changed, who else loved the Easter egg of what? When he's throwing through the other experiments, and I think it was Angel, Ruben, and Leroy, where he says, I'm going to turn you into 627. And I'm like, ooh, I love that. I love that so much. But I thought that was really cool how they were able to, add that in, do all those fun things. But really excited when I saw those. I kept fascinating about those little experiments and that little Easter egg. And I was really hoping that like an end credit scene was going to like dive into the experiments or show Angel. But if we get a sequel, we're probably going to get at least Angel and probably Leroy. Maybe even Ruben. I mean, the three of them, come on. I should personally hold off on Leroy for a little bit, but time will tell. Of course, going back to what I was talking about before, my biggest issue is what they do with Jumba. Jumba is this evil scientist, and I'm okay with him being an evil scientist, but it also shows that at the same time as Stitch changing, Jumba also does too in that original film. And it was really disappointing to me that he didn't change. He just stayed the same. And it doesn't feel like the Ohana right at the end. I like how the Cobra Bubble stays. I like how Pleagley stays. I like how Nani stays. Again, or not how Nani stays, but I like how Nani like goes off, and I like everything about that ending. Like overall, like I like where all that kind of definitively like sat forward with. I like how Lilo gets adopted. All of that, totally fine with. I wish when Jumbo kidnaps Stitch and Lilo's on the ship, I wish Jumbo had a heart of change. And it wouldn't have felt superficial, wouldn't have felt anything. Stitch is his creation. And he's already noticing this change in him. So if you would have just had him tweak it where he goes, in the middle of them fighting or something, just goes, you're right. And maybe he turns the ship around, the ship still crashes, they have to save him, get the same ending, literally the same ending. But it just ties in a little bit more to what they do in the original film, what the original ending is, right at the very end when Stitch says his goodbyes and everyone has to stay. That's the one thing I would have kept. And then again, Jumbo doesn't have to be the villain for a sequel. You could have had Dr. Hamsterville. You could have had Gantu finally make an appearance. Like you have these avenues, or maybe even make a new character. Hell, I don't know. But that is the only thing for me that when I look back at this live action remake, it did not stick with me well, and it is the one thing that I've been wanting to talk about with anyone who's seen the movie. But regardless, that's my number 2. My number 1 is the original Lilo Stitch, which is the best Disney animated film of all time. I think for me, Stitch is one of the most beloved characters of all time, and I think Lilo and Stitch is such an important film for all the reasons that I mentioned about the remake, but more soulfully because it is perfect. It's beautifully animated from top to down. The way that it dives into the Hawaiian culture, I think, is absolutely touching and beautiful. The usage of Elvis music throughout all the way through is absolutely amazing. But specifically, Lilo as a character, someone who feels like an outsider, is something that a lot of kids feel like. And the fact that she finds her family, which is very much broken, but brings a family together into a non-broken way, mending all the pieces that are missing inside of them, Pleakley, Jumba, and even Cobra Bubbles in a way. It really heals her and Nani's relationship and their family, and Stitch in a way is the glue that's bringing them all together. Even if he's crazy, zany, and gets everyone into too much trouble. I absolutely love how the original film details that. And again, it is beautifully animated. Like I've rewatched this film like 3 or 4 times already this year. It's one that we rewatch constantly in this house. Now that I have a kid and he's obsessed with Lilo and Stitch, and it's like that's the one movie that he likes to go back and rewatch. We always put on Lilo and Stitch. We always watch it as a family now. And it's one that every time I've seen the movie, I've always loved it since the beginning, but every time I've seen it, it grows more and more on me. And now I just have this softer spot for this character than I ever thought I could ever have. And for me, this film is perfection. I think it remains my favorite Disney animated film. I don't think anything will ever knock that off the top. And it's kind of the same thing for Toy Story for me with Pixar. I don't think anything will ever knock off Toy Story for me as being my favorite Pixar film of all time. A lot of that's nostalgia. A lot of that's what I grew up with. But the original Lilo and Stitch is a masterpiece. And it's one that, again, is the beautiful and perfect storytelling of what Ohana really is. That entire story is specifically in the way that it actually details, and I like how, again, Jumba and Pleakley are sent to this planet to capture Stitch. But in reality, they start observing and seeing how he's changing and how he's changing for the better. And basically everything I said about the remake that I loved. And then when you get into the ending of this and you get down to how the ground council woman, like Lilo says, I bought him, all this stuff, I own him, and her change of opinion and understanding. I love how that all plays out. Seeing her opinion change from a little experiment saying "Mida nada Krista," ha ha ha, now being Ohana. Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. That's all the stuff that hits the hearts right there. I'm trying not to cry right now because it's so perfect. I absolutely love Lilo Stitch. Again, it's a masterpiece. That's my ranking. Leave your thoughts down below. Hit that like, subscribe button, and of course, until next time, stay classy.